So yeah, tonight, here to talk a little bit about the Red Deer River, the brown trout red survey project that we've been conducting over the last many years. And then switch gears a little bit and we'll go to some pokey fish and talk about Alberta's provincial walleye stocking program and in specific the Lac Ste spawn camp that we've been operating for the last 4 years, and then also potentially some volunteer opportunities there. So we talk about the Red Deer River, the brown trout red survey project, our walleye stocking program, most recently or from 2021 to 2024, the walleye egg collections, more commonly known as the walleye spawn camps that we've been running, and in specific Lac Ste, and then talk about at the end here some Lac Ste, the spawn camps and volunteer opportunities that we can have. So in terms of the first topic here, the Red Deer River brown trout red survey. Talk a little bit about the dam itself, give a little bit of background on when it was constructed and its operations. Talk a little bit about the red survey, actually what that is, and then cover some of the results that we've been finding and monitoring over time. So in terms of the Dixon Dam, it's located just southwest of Red Deer, about probably 25 minutes to get out there. It was constructed back in the early 1980s and filled first in 1983 and started operations. It's actually owned and operated by the province of Alberta, with the current Ministry of Agriculture and Irrigation and Water Operations Infrastructure branch within that ministry. The main purpose of its construction was providing assured water supply to downstream municipalities. Of course, the dam has secondary benefits. Those include obviously the flood control in terms of minimizing flood impacts downstream of the dam, improved water quality, also recreational aspects with the creation of the reservoir itself, and then also the creation of that tailwater fishery and extending that cold water fishery downstream. Also, it produces hydroelectric power as well. So there is turbines here just not on the main dam itself, but just over here. They can produce, I think, up to about 15 megawatts of power. And it also provides the ability to assist with meeting that apportionment agreement with the South Saskatchewan River and maintaining 50% of natural flow to Saskatchewan, as well incorporating the Bow River, the Oldman, and the South Saskatchewan. Prior to the construction, actually some of the river flows that we had tracked were quite low in the winter. There was times winter flows got to as low as 2 cubic meters per second. So we've got some major cities, that being the city of Red Deer, and then further downstream in Drumheller. So certainly there was water quality concerns and water supply concerns prior to the dam. Where now the dam operates and releases 16 cubes as the minimum flow during those overwintering periods. So as a result, there is certainly more stability with water supply for those municipalities. Plus also it has improved the water quality and that overwintering for aquatic life as well within the river. And then additionally, with respect to that tailwater fishery, it's created habitat there for not only the walleye and pike and the goldeye, but also now mountain whitefish are quite prevalent, and then also the brown trout, which I'll talk about as well. So yeah, this is just a couple of the photos here. We had obviously the most recent flooding event in 2013. So as you can see, that was the spillway operating and flooding downstream. And then, when there's little to no flow, provides a lot of recreational opportunity up at the dam as well. For anglers fishing from shore, and then certainly those that want to float that section as well. So in terms of the survey itself, I'll talk a little bit more about the history. So in terms of when it was constructed, part of the EIA, so that's the environmental impact assessment, they did conduct as an offsetting at that time, stocking of the reservoir itself, in terms of providing a temporary fishery. So actually the reservoir upstream, so that's Glendifer Reservoir, was actually stocked, I get my numbers right here, in 83 with 135,000 cutthroat and then 61,000 rainbow trout. In 84, 67,000 brown trout and another 152,000 rainbows. And then rainbows continue to be stocked in 85, 86, and a few in 87 as well. So that was just to provide kind of a temporary fishery upstream. After the dam was constructed, some of that fisheries work occurred. All of a sudden, they realized there was a request to create a tailwater fishery. So in 85, they stocked 65,000 rainbows downstream, and then they stocked again in 86, 87, and 88. So each year was 68,000, 50,000, 67,000 rainbow trout in order to create a tailwater rainbow trout fishery was the initial plan when the dam was constructed. However, in the late 80s, it was discovered brown trout were present, and actually in 91 and 92, brown trout were then stocked, 950 brown trout from the hatchery. They were 2-year-old brown trout were stocked from the hatchery. And then in 1992, they transferred 969 brown trout from the Bow River, all adults, and stocked them below the dam in order to start creating and help augment what was there. And to create a brown trout fishery was the objective at that time. So over that period of time, obviously the brown trout have naturalized and are successfully reproducing since the late 1980s, and with those additional stocking events. In terms of brown trout, probably most are aware they are a fall spawning fish species. Here in the Red Deer River, that's spawning typically starts kind of mid-October, so just shortly after Thanksgiving, and proceeds right up to end of October. The first week of November is pretty much when it starts to teeter off. So during that period of time, yeah, the fish start to concentrate. Females start digging a red, which basically is just using the tail, dig a deposit within the substrate, usually some smaller gravel to small size cobble. They'll deposit the eggs, the males come in, fertilize, and then the female will cover those eggs up. And what results is a nice clear area, which I'll have some photos to show. And that's what we typically call a red. So this is just a photo here at Dixon Dam at the boat launch. So this stays in place all year. So this is just a buoy line that just restricts access to upstream closer to the dam. So basically we'll stage here in, usually it's after May or November 6th, 7th. We try to do the survey kind of that first full week of November. And we try to pick obviously the nicest day because typically it's sometimes pretty cold in November. So our objectives for that survey. Certainly we want to do the survey. Basically, it's a census. We're floating downstream. We're counting every red within that section. Allows us to do those temporal comparisons from year to year to year. And then also re-identify those red locations, those changes over time, whether or not they're using the same areas, whether or not they've moved to different areas. And then also their risk in terms of those areas, in terms of how close they are to shore and how deep they are as well, in terms of the operations of the dam and releasing the water. So yeah, this is some of the habitat in terms of a gravel bank bed here. And this shallow section here is actually just downstream of the dam, just around the corner. So within about a kilometer is easy access to get to. And typically in this section, we'll count anywhere, you know, historically, there could have been 100, 200 reds in this little section. More recently, there'll be anywhere from about 20 to 30. That's the first location. And typically, yeah, depending on the staff that we've got out with us, we'll use this area to calibrate everybody as to what exactly they need to look for and observe. So you can see all the substrate here, much darker color, lots of a little bit more silt built up, and then right here is a clear area where the brown trout red would be. So we've got kind of the top end of it. This is the upstream. This is kind of the pit area, and then over here would be where the eggs would be deposited and covered up. So highly visible. They are you can't miss them when you're floating down that section of river. And then here again, quite visible again. Again, a little bit smaller in size. They can range from, you know, depending on the size of the fish, you know, just around, you know, probably 50, 60 centimeters all the way to, you know, 2 meters in length.
Jason, could I ask a question about the reds, or would you rather wait to the end?
No, that's certainly, there's questions as we go.
So to count the reds, you have to have people spread out across the river waiting the whole length.
Not waiting, we have boats, so we're basically floating, and then we get out in this section just to calibrate everybody,
Yeah.
but basically we can float by, stand up in our boats and basically count. But if there's a high density, we'll get out quickly and we'll actually start counting. Because sometimes these reds will get some overlapping reds where it's perhaps a prime area where fish are concentrated, and they'll actually superimpose and start digging all this area. So you may have multiple reds in one location. So in order to actually get out and actually count how many actual pits there is, in order to be more accurate, right? So,
Okay, so that can't be done from a drone.
there has been other jurisdictions that have done it with the drone. Again, depending on your drone and the quality of the imagery and how the sun is shining and the glare, it can be, yeah, there is potentially some error associated with that. Plus, with drones, you'd still have to be on the water in line of sight to fly it, and then there's still time to review all the imagery as well. Yeah, we've looked at it. Unfortunately, battery life is a concern when it's, you know, minus 20 out and that sort of thing. But certainly, yeah, it is an option to consider depending on the situation and locations. Yeah.
Thanks.
So yeah, we've you know, had various staff come out. Obviously, these were our fisheries biologists, but previous years we've had other volunteers come out and float alongside with us. We had you know, at the time Bob Scammell was came out with us quite a bit. Barry Mitchell as well. Some of the other guides that fish this section of river. We've got some of our water operations staff from the dam have been out with us before and actually showing them where these reds are, how close they are, what kind of depth, and really explaining to them, you know, if they control the tap and if they turn the tap too low, they could actually strand some of these reds, right? So, you know, having those discussions And actually them out seeing it has been really beneficial to having them, basically shut the tap off in terms of locking it down around that Thanksgiving time so that we're releasing the same amount of flow all winter. There's no adjustments occurring, thus not impacting these reds in terms of where they are and maintaining that there's adequate water and flow over top of them. So
Do the fish will do the same spots every year?
I've got a slide coming up that kind of shows the distribution of those. Generally, the fish will utilize the same locations year after year. If we do get a really high flow event, certainly that's kind of just like the extra sketch, right? The river can certainly change, deposit new material. Fish will clue in on those areas. I'll discuss some of the side channels that used to be really prevalent, which have changed after the 2013 flood. But generally speaking, in the main channel of the river, they will use the same locations year after year after year. And additionally, we've also had consulting companies come out with us and train their staff. They'll float on beside us and we're able to help them calibrate and explain what they would be looking for, because they do some of this work in other locations as well. So this is just us here floating down. If we observe a red and if it's just a single one, we'll just count, keep on floating. Right? So this is literally just a 1-day survey where we put in the morning and we're off the water well before dark. So
how far do you go downstream from the dam?
great question. So this slide will show us that. So right here, we've got the spillway here at the dam. Here's the boat launch. Again, those photos that I showed was this section right here. And then we take out just off here. This is where the medicine comes down and the confluence is just over here. So this is about 12.5 kilometers of river. Here's the Little Red that comes in from the south. And as you can see, this is 2023 and as of last fall as well in 2024. So these are just dot locations and a number associated with them as to how many reds were at that location. So certainly we've got clustering up in here. Similar spots being used year after year. Clustering in here. Here, and then here's actually a new side channel that was formed after the 2013 flood, and the fish immediately keyed in on that newer habitat. So generally those new side channels that form, there's lots of woody debris that's overhanging, clean gravel that's there, and the fish key on those locations almost immediately. Prior to the 2013 flood, we actually had a side channel here that used to be really prevalent and highly used by the brown trout, and then also this channel here, which unfortunately now has dried up. There's no flow going down it. But back when I first came to Red Deer, this side channel here would have 100+ reds in it just by itself. Yeah. And then we did discover one quite low down this year as well. But generally, all the reds are within this 5 to 6, 7 kilometers of river from the put in here up at the dam. We've never discovered any here throughout all the years. And again, this river, as you can see, changes quite a bit depending on the flow and the release of the dam if there's a high water event. So here is our red count data starting first in 1991. So following that first stocking of brown trout. However, it was discovered, prior to that there was certainly brown trout that were present in that section of the Red Deer River that was downstream of the dam. That whether or not they came through the dam. Or whether or not it was part of the stocking that occurred a few years prior in the reservoir, it's uncertain. But nonetheless, there was certainly some brown trout presence, restocked again. 952-year-olds in this year, then 969 came from the Bow River. Unfortunately, all those mature fish didn't result in immediately having. We were assuming half those fish that were stocked were females. We didn't have 500 to 1,000 reds immediately. Unfortunately, yes, it was just a slow incline in terms of the number of reds that we were counting that were present downstream of the dam. Certainly, we had a big increase in 2001. Peaked at 2004, we had 547 reds within that section of river. And then we had the 2005 flood. We saw a big decline following that year. That was a 1 in 100-year flood. Likely lost the recruitment from this fall in 2004, plus displaced fish much further downstream. However, we did see a bit of a rebound following that, and then we saw a sharp decline, and it stayed relatively low right up until the 2013 flood. But then surprisingly, we actually saw an increase after that next major flood event. And then we're been hovering that 150 average for the last 10 years. It really dropped in 2022, basically to the same level that we were in 91. However, this last fall, we have seen quite a significant rebound all the way up to 191. So that was counted just this past fall. So optimistic about this. It wasn't looking so great up until last fall in terms of the fish numbers. And anecdotally, I'm getting quite a few anglers noting that they were catching a lot of brown trout this past summer. Lots that were in that smaller size range that would likely be maturing or the first year of maturity. But we did still observe a lot of big fish that were still hanging around those reds when we did float down this past winter as well. So.
What kind of predation do you have on the river? Do you have cormorants, pelicans, and otters?
There is pelicans on the reservoir. There is a blue heron colony on the Medicine, a rookery. I don't think we have any otters below the dam. I don't think there's been any reports of that. So, but the pelicans, there's certainly pelicans on the reservoir. I think they mostly stay there, but they have been seen on the stretch of the Red Deer. So,
What effects would the walleye population through that area have?
so certainly there is walleye present. There's pike numbers aren't generally all that high. We certainly do have Prussian carp all the way up to the dam. The Medicine is full of Prussian carp as well. But certainly, yeah, there's walleye, and there's rather large walleye present. Certainly, the Medicine River is one of the key spawning rivers for walleye. So they do run up there every spring, spawn, and then there is a couple major overwintering holes that, yeah, it's quite easy to observe walleye up to 30 inches that are hanging down there, right? So, but then you're also seeing mountain lake fish swimming around with them as well.
Do those Prussian carp, do they tend to root around in the reds looking for food?
It hasn't been observed. They typically are in those back bay, slow flowing areas and any areas that have vegetation. So if I go back to some of those slides, some of those oxbows, they're in that type of habitat, but that's also where the pike are as well, right? So yes,
What happened to the rainbows?
that's a great question. Yeah, they were deemed to be unsuccessful, so, which is a bit surprising because.
Even above, like, you don't
Yeah.
have to put a lot of rainbow above either.
Mhm.
You would think that the
Like-
amount of rainbow you put in.
Whether or not, it was, they were stocked at, probably that 10 centimeter size, which isn't very big. And they just weren't able to,
The cutthroat seemed to do okay, what I hear.
but yeah, upstream, yeah, there's certainly, decent brown trout and certainly brook trout upstream.
Yeah.
Yeah. But yeah, the rainbows just didn't take, yeah.
Maybe they were all triploid.
No, not back then, no. No. But yeah, that was, the initial intent was to create a rainbow trout fishery. In terms of that tailwater fishery, right? And they did stock, some significant numbers, for 85 through to 88. They were throwing, average over 60,000 fish in there, right? So there is the odd rainbow that does get caught. But they generally leak in through the medicine, it's suspected. Through Hanson's Reservoir, we stock it, and then that tributary comes and flows into the medicine, so.
Somebody said that there was a swampy area right by the lake. And that there's rainbows up in there. Now, I mean, like that's. I only hearsay.
A swamp downstream of the dam or upstream?
That, well. Right by Medicine Lake, apparently.
Oh, way up by Medicine Lake, oh,
Yeah.
okay. Yeah, I'm not,
Yeah,
Familiar there,
like I said, that was second or third.
because
hand.
generally, yeah, we don't see any of the brown trout, nor the mountain whitefish utilize the Medicine River. It gets pretty low flow and big aquatic. It's pretty warm come midsummer. There's certainly pike throughout the Medicine. And certainly lots of, sucker species, and we do have carp as well, yeah.
These numbers from that year to that year, is that considered average, good or poor? On the stretch of river that 6-7 kilometers compared to any other rivers?
Yeah, unfortunately, we haven't calibrated, this number of reds to a population estimate in that same year, so. That would be the ideal, so then we could actually calculate how many fish per kilometer. This would represent, right? We did make an attempt, unfortunately, in 2005. I was part of that survey where, the fish were just so dispersed and spread out, we weren't able to catch enough to recapture. We did attempt it again in 2011, but again, our numbers were relatively low. We weren't able to capture enough brown trout to mark. However, I will, I'm trying to hopefully maybe repeat and try again in terms of actually going out and doing a mark recapture, pit tag the brown trout that we could actually track over time and do, population estimates to basically factor in as to, how many brown trout do we have per kilometer in that section of river. The brown trout do go downstream, like in the summertime, people will catch them in the city the odd time, and then that stretch in and around Innisfail. Historically, they did float further downstream. We just do that upper 12.5 kilometers, because essentially that's what they found was all the spawning activity was occurring in that upper reach. And they didn't capture or didn't observe any other reds generally anywhere further downstream. So that's why we've just been focusing. However, the river does change. We were going to plan to do it this past fall. The weather was good to actually float down to Innisfail and then do Innisfail to the Benhold Bridge just to confirm that again. But we didn't get to that, but it is on our plan to do just to do another confirmation to make sure that we're not missing any brown trout spawning activity further downstream. Because that may lead to, maybe these numbers are just reflective of that upper reach, and maybe there is another population and more reds downstream that we're simply missing. That wasn't the case historically when these numbers were really, really high. All that spawning was occurring. So we've continued that, so.
So reds are still visible in the spring before flood?
No, like if I go back to this photo here. So this red probably occurred in kind of that, you know, mid-October, and it's already starting to silt in. And this picture was in kind of that first week in November. So, you know, generally by Christmas, January, this would probably be covered enough that it'd be pretty tough to recognize. These ones certainly, you know, occurred probably in the latter part of October or that first full week of November. But when we're floating down, we might see a fish or two on a red. It's the spawning activity is pretty much done. That usually around November 10th, is plus or minus a day or two. And again, we've had to adjust this based on the weather because we do want ideal conditions in terms of, you know, it being clear and sunny and actually somewhat comfortable to float down. I have floated down in snowstorms and fog and yeah, minus 20, and it's not very pleasant, but yeah, given they do eventually silt in a little bit. So yeah, we wouldn't observe this. Now, if we floated down, it'd be pretty much impossible to detect. Other than you might barely see the slight depression of that pit, yeah.
You don't get stuck floating down, do you?
Yeah, the one boat you're probably seeing a prop on that motor. You gotta be super careful. It's flowing about 17, 18 cubes. They can go down to 16, but generally, I've asked them to, you know, whatever they're flowing at Thanksgiving, and if conditions are good, they'll keep it up at 17 or 18 cubes. More water, better for fish, right? So, they said whatever you want to flow for the winter and release, make sure you have that set by the later kind of the October 18th, 20th. We know the fish are starting to spawn. Right?
So they shut down the river for walleye spawn in the spring?
They don't shut it down. They continue to flow that base flow.
No.
Right? So yeah.
Fishing rigs.
Yes.
Fish like right now, it's not open until May 1.
Depending, yeah, the medicine's closed till this 16th of June,
Yeah.
a little bit later, or June 1st.
It'll be
We got the rates here. Let's make sure. We actually do have a new rate book out this year earlier than
yeah.
they did last year, so
Just
you know,
going on time.
it was early this year. I actually had this book in the office here before April 1st, so.
British Columbia only put their books out every 2 years.
So the Red Deer River, yeah, closes, opens May 15th to March 1st. So it does close on the 2nd of March, opens up again on May 15th. The medicine, just because of that walleye spawning, is June 16th to March 1st, yeah. So, so yeah, that's basically the information that I've got to share. In terms of the red survey, yeah, like I mentioned, it's one day, it's non-intrusive. Basically, we're just floating down, observing. It gives us a, you know, idea what the population is doing. It acts as a surrogate to actually doing a population estimate and actually knowing roughly how many brown trout would be in that section of river. Generally, if the number is going up, reflects that the population is increasing. If the numbers are going down, reflects that the population is likely decreased as well. So again, we haven't been able to successfully do a population estimate in this section, but it's certainly not densities that we see on the boat. So it's a totally different system, right?
Are you doing any work up on above? On the upper ridge here?
There hasn't been any recently.
Well, I just wanted
Yeah.
to wonder.
Yeah. It's a difficult section to navigate.
Yeah,
From Sundre to.
Yeah.
To Garrington and Garrington to the reservoir, yes, yeah. I was involved with the oil spill that happened there. Yeah, it was airboats only to get around, yeah. It's really sinuous and, well, the floodplain is 500-600 meters plus, right? And
Yeah.
one year the river might be on this side, then the next year, or even halfway through the year, it may change, right? So, yeah. So, yeah, I'll switch gears a little bit now and talk a little bit about Alberta's walleye stocking history, and then get into a little bit more details in terms of what we've recently done. So yeah, this graph kind of just illustrates the history of walleye stocking in the province. And maybe it might be surprising, but Alberta, has essentially been stocking walleye for now just about 100 years. First walleye stocking that occurred was back in 1926. It was actually 2 water bodies. Trivia, I guess you can tell your friends, but actually it was 2 water bodies. It was Buffalo Lake and Sylvan. Actually, that were the first 2 water bodies that were stocked with walleye here in the province. This graph is color coded, so by color is basically the decade. So not just the one stocking event. And again, it's historical. I have no idea if it was just eyed eggs or if they just took some walleye from one location. The historical records are pretty sparse in terms of the details. The 30s, there was a couple stocking events, the 40s, then certainly through the 50s, it certainly ramped up almost every year. They did some stocking of some walleye. Similar in the 60s, 70s, and then the 80s really took off. And that was part of the walleye enhancement efforts that were at the time, and then certainly throughout the 90s. The 2000s switched gears a little bit and focused on restoration stockings of Lac Ste mainly. But there's certainly some other water bodies that were stocked in that period of time, Sylvan Lake being one of them in 06, 07, and 08. Continued into the early 2010 to, I think, 14. And then again, we have reinvigorated that program and then started the walleye stocking program again in 21 and continued up until this last year and continuing again. So ramped it up last year, and then this coming year should be even higher as well. So we do have some of the stats here. I don't know if I can. No, it's not going to let me. Just in terms of and again, the y-axis here is millions of walleye stocked. So certainly peaked here in the 2000s. I think this was 07 and 08 or 06 and 08, over 50 million. But again, within context, I'll have some photos later, is they're walleye fry. Like they're not walleye like restocked trout. They're walleye fry, which are literally the size of your fingernail, your thumbnail. They're just little fries. So when you see high numbers, you got to reflect in terms of their fry, and they all don't survive in terms of a catchable size walleye eventually in 4 to 5 years. So, but that just kind of gives you an overview of how the walleye stocking program has changed and evolved over time, and then under different programs as well, in terms of trying to reestablish walleye fisheries that were declined or collapsed back in the 80s and 90s. Some of the restoration efforts that occurred in the 2000s, and then now trying to increase harvest opportunities under the current program. So yeah, this is just a little bit of background in terms of the minister's vision back in January 2020. followed extensive public engagement. We did a bunch of face-to-face engagement sessions that January, ironically, just before COVID hit. And then at that time, there was overwhelming support to reestablish the walleye stocking program in the province again. And as such, it did resume. We didn't do any stocking in 2020, obviously during the pandemic, but switched gears in 2021 and we were able to start the program that year and have continued for the last 4 years. Certainly the current program is to supplement existing walleye fisheries, create new walleye fisheries if there is opportunity to do so. And then additionally, if there's water bodies that require any restoration stockings as well, that would be incorporated as well. But mainly so far, it's just been supplementing existing walleye fisheries where the stockings have occurred.
Is it dry that you're stocking?
Pro-
Are they dry that you're stocking?
Yes, yeah.
Have you experimented with any other sizes?
In the past, they have experimented with fingerlings and different size fingerlings, so growing them at the Cold Lake hatchery and some of the ponds that they do have. They were stocking them as a small fingerling, which is probably about length of your pinky or kind of that 50-60 mil size. Kind of, they would stock those out, collect them, stock them out kind of in that July period of time. And then they would also save some, grow them out till kind of end of August and then stock them at probably a 120 to 150 mil
Is there
size.
any information on success rate when they're bigger?
Yeah, like certainly the US jurisdictions have major extensive walleye stocking programs and they have, experimented with, success. Obviously, as you grow them larger, they cannibalize each other in the ponds and that sort of thing. So the ability to stock out later in terms of the numbers is certainly reduced, but it's again hit and miss as to the success overall, right? So we did in 2021 actually did stock some of the fry, hold them and then stock them on a larger size. Unfortunately, it was labor intensive and we also have the risk of aquatic invasive species and we've got those concerns as well. So if you're putting them into a pond, filling with water, all the other biota, when they collect those, comes with those fingerlings, right? So that was a concern just given our invasive species program and the risk associated with that. We did pivot though. We do have a walleye grow out pond on 40 Mile Reservoir that was actually constructed back in the 80s and 90s, where it's right adjacent to the reservoir, connected to the irrigation system, so they can fill it up. We can put fry in there, and then they grow to a larger fingerling size, and then we can actually collect them and stock them out, which the ACA was actually overseeing last year and was successful in that program. So they're looking to continue that as well and increase that success rate and hopefully get better returns. So we have adjusted and looking for other opportunities, working with the irrigation districts to see if we can create additional grow ponds as well.
So does the slot sizes play hand in hand with the amount of fish that you're going to be stocking?
So yeah, as we stock out, yeah, we do have to, start looking at some of these and monitoring and seeing if, the regulation is working. But again, it takes a number of years in order to start seeing some of that success, right? So when they're stocking them out at, fry size, it's going to take us, 3, 4, 5 years in order for them to get to a size where anglers are catching them, but also that our index is starting to detect them as well. So yeah, I'll just go into, how we go about collecting those walleye eggs from these spawn caps in order to support that program. So basically, yeah, our walleye egg collection start the latter part of April and go into May. Um. So in terms of what we need to know about walleye, they're a spring spawner. Basically, they'll start spawning right after ice goes out. And that's typically, here essentially is kind of that late April, early May. And depending on the water body, they might be using some of the tributaries, they might be using some of the shoals that are in the lake. They'll typically be spawning on, gravel to small cobble here. So this is actually a photo from Lac Ste on one of the spawning reefs, and all these glowing dots are actually the walleye eyes. So they'll come up, they spawn at night, concentrate on these areas. They just broadcast spawn in terms of their eggs and fertilize the eggs, and they just fall into the interstitial spaces of the substrate. So yeah, basically, we need to know, a little bit of knowledge about the lake, whether or not that lake has a sustainable, healthy population, to act as a donor lake. And then depending on that location, and other social and political issues of the water body are all factored in terms of how we select water bodies as a potential donor. So, and then the rest basically is, can we catch enough walleye in that short period of time in order to meet the egg targets, in order for those stockings to be successful or to deliver enough eggs to be to meet those objectives. So yeah, this is just a photo of one of the traps in terms of all the walleye that we can potentially catch in an overnight set. So
How many fish do you need to get 1 million fry?
Lac Ste. On average, mature female has about 35,000 eggs.
So 30 fish.
Will get us close to, yeah. Again, yeah, there can be, larger fish can produce more eggs, but on average, that's what we found, year after year is about that 35,000 based on the average size of a walleye in Lac Ste. So.
And you need less males, obviously.
Actually need more males. So we typically do like a 3 or 4 to 1 ratio. In terms of the fertilization, yeah. Provides just more genetics. So yeah, this currently are the spawn camps here in the province. That were operated up until last year. We've got Lac Ste. Here just west of the city, Rock Island Lake, which is just north of Athabasca. And then we have Marie Creek, which is a tributary to Ethel Lake, just right adjacent to Cold Lake. So it's literally, I think, about 15-20 minutes from the hatchery. So quite convenient in terms of that location. And then we'll have a new one here this coming spring up at Graham Lake, which is up in that Peerless Lake cluster north of Slave Lake. So we did have some historical spawn camps that were up at on Brett Creek, which is a tributary to Primrose, which is just up here, just off of the edge of the Cold Lake Weapons Range. That was historically been used back in the 80s and 90s. And then also there was the Bistu camp, which is way up here at Bistu Lake, right adjacent to the Northwest Territories. So, however, these camps support collection of walleye in terms of the watersheds now. So Lac Ste. Supports stocking within the South Saskatchewan River Basin in terms of the genetic source. The Marie Creek Ethel camp is supporting the Beaver Lake drainage, and then Rock Island is water bodies within the Athabasca watershed. And now with Graham, would support water bodies within that the Peace River, Slave River watersheds.
Are walleye like railing with different refugee populations?
We haven't done the extensive work like that, but there has been a little bit of genetics that have been done over time, and yes, forensically, our lab can tell if a walleye came from Slave Lake to a walleye that maybe came out of Bat or Bot Lake. They are distinct and they can tell them apart traits. So, in order, we suspect that there likely is, and unfortunately, a lot of historical stalking has occurred, especially here on the southern reservoirs where there's been lots of mixing, strains from Bistu, Primrose, Slave Lake was operated. We did get eggs from Lake Diefenbaker as well from Saskatchewan during the 80s and 90s. So a lot of these populations have a wide mixture. Whereas water bodies up in here may have never been stocked or were stocked from those sources, so we certainly want to continue that. Maybe the risk isn't as high down here given historical stockings, but certainly, moving forward, we want to be aware of that as well. So that is why we are looking at sources within watersheds. A little bit more conservative conservation needs. So great question. So yeah, I'll go through Lac Ste. It's the closest here. I've been part of this camp for the last 4 years, leading it for the last couple. So basically, as soon as the ice goes off, we start mobilizing our staff and our crew and all the equipment. We're parked right amongst all the residents there. This is Klinkhammer Park right in the Summer Village. The Summer Village graciously allows us to utilize this space for the spawn camp. So we mobilize holiday trailers, all our trucks, the boats, and then we start setting up the spawning. Prior to last year was just a wall tent that we had set up, and now we've got an actual dedicated trailer. There's some photos of that coming up. We got lots of green space right next to there as well, so it gives us the ability to set up our traps and get them all rigged up in terms of the traps themselves, and then the leads that go onto those shoals and basically extend out into the water, and then there's wings that come off of those traps, so we can get these all rigged up on shore. Here's a photo of the new spawning trailer that our hatchery folks have rigged up and designed that supports all the stocking. And then on shore here, we're right off the edge of the beach. We've got some holding pens out here. We've got this contraption here, which basically is a fish water slide. So once we're done spawning the walleye, instead of having to walk them back and recover them, we can actually just shoot them down this water slide. They go into a nice holding pen, recover, and then we can simply release them at the end once they've fully recovered. So this is just another view. Looking back up at the camp, we set up an extra tent here for drying and all our gear in case the weather turns a little sour, and then we set up a adjacent tent here, which actually has our water circulation system set up in it. So basically, it's just a big jacuzzi tub that water pumps through a couple chillers in order to keep the temperature fairly constant. Goes through the trailer, through all the egg upwellers, and then returns in here, and then process repeats itself. Here's inside the trailer. So along the one edge is all our mixing bowls. Here on the other side is the tables, all the plumbing system. These are the upweller jars that all the eggs go into. So there's constant flow, and the eggs just basically are just slowly rolling continuously in order to avoid clumping and smothering. So yeah, once all that stuff is set up on shore, the following day or the same day, depending on the conditions, we're actually out on the lake. So here's the spawning reefs that are just out from the shoreline where we set up. This is the main island in the background on Lac Ste, if you're familiar with that lake. And then this is basically that rock point that always goes to shore. Some years it's more exposed than others. This was a photo from essentially last year where the lake levels were a little bit lower. And this was really exposed. When we started in 2021, wasn't very many rocks exposed, and actually we did quite a bit of a cleanup here. Lots of lower boat legs and motor legs and props and.
Yeah, guys lost their boat.
Oh, yeah, this is, most people think they can cut across between the island and what they can see here. Danger, yeah, don't do it, yeah. So yeah, we'll have our crews out, with the boats. Here's the traps going in. Once they're set, they're just above the surface of the water or just below, off those spawning reefs. And then basically we come back the next day and they look like this. So anywhere from 200 to 300 walleye each of those traps they'll catch per day. And we typically run 6 to 7 traps.
How shallow is that water there?
This water, where those traps, so those traps are basically either 4 or 5 feet high. Yeah. So it's not very far off of those spawning shoals, yeah. And then, yeah, basically we've got our staff, they'll dip net all those walleye out. We've got onboard tanks, aerated tanks. We'll do all the sorting. Males and females. We've got another boat. We'll transfer those fish into we just call it the fish ferry boat. They're running those to shore, putting them into the holding tanks. We'll put them in these pens, and then we've got people on shore running these fish back and forth and bringing them up to that trailer, and then our staff inside do all the magic in terms of expressing eggs and the milt, fertilizing, and then everybody is mixing the eggs. Basically, use about 3 to 4 minutes in terms of fertilization. And then we've got to mix them in order to avoid all the clumping, rinsing them with some tannic acid, which helps with that and minimizes the clumping. Rinsing it with water, repeating that, and then they're eventually dumped into these upwellers, allowed to sit there and harden for at least 4 to 6 hours before they're ready to be transported to cold lakes. So yeah, this is just a photo of our fish slide. So yeah, we've got water flowing in here, and then this photo, yes, there's water. Typically, if it was turned on, we'd be rushing out of here. The fish collect in this holding pen, and then yeah, once they're fully recovered, they also remain. We have almost zero mortality in terms of the handling of these fish and utilizing them for the spawn camps.
So do you get the odd sauger in with the woman?
Pardon?
Do you get the odd sauger?
Sucker?
No sauger.
Sauger? No sauger in St. Anne. No. These traps primarily are 99% walleye. We will get the odd burbot in the trap. We might get the odd pike. Might see the odd perch. That's it. Yeah. If we were to leave those traps later, and the water temperatures warms up, the walleye come in first and spawn, and the suckers come in afterwards once the temperatures increase. So certainly if we were to set traps in other locations, we'd probably catch pike and coming off the shore and some vegetation. Similarly, yeah, we could intercept suckers that might be migrating as well. But we're pretty dialed in terms of where Walleye are spawning at least in that location. There's multiple other locations and rock humps and shoreline that they'll be spawning. This is just the closest to where we can set up on shore and minimizes all that transport time and handling time, so. And we're able to get enough from that location where we don't have to set other locations on the water bodies. So.
So how long does it take you to set up an operation with that?
Basically a day to mobilize everybody there. It's a day to set up and prep. The next day the traps are in the water. And day 4 we're spawning fish, yeah. And depending on conditions and the fish. Last year we were done, we collected. Numbers, 14 million eggs in 4 days. Yeah. But the numbers coming up here, so. Yeah, last year was the quickest count in 4 days. Previous ones we'd run 6-7 days. Usually the first couple days were a little bit slower. Just because water temperatures were cool. Last year, the temperatures were still cool, the fish just showed up. They were ready to go, and we did start seeing, typically it's, the average size walleye, the bigger females don't come till it warms up a little bit. Last year was kind of odd, we were catching big 65 centimeter, 5, 6, 7 pound walleye the first day. Again, they provided more eggs, but we were still on average that 36,000 eggs per female. So yeah, here's our upwellers right here. Each of these upwellers, if we get closer to the tops, about 1 million eggs. So right here, this is about roughly just over 4 million eggs in 1 day. Yeah. We just spaced them out a little bit, but if we were to really fill these up, yeah, it's about 1 million eggs per upweller. Yeah, once they're hardened later in the afternoon, they're just basically siphoned into these little water containers, put into these coolers, so 2 containers per cooler. These are the perfect size coolers. They fit in there super nicely, super secure. We throw them in the back of a SUV, strap them all down, and they're off to Cold Lake that same day. They arrive at Cold Lake usually sometime just before midnight, and then there's staff there that will transfer them into these upwellers in the hatchery. Basically, the hatchery is just a magnified version of this water plumbing system that we have mobile on site. They've got capacity at Cold Lake for 100 million eggs. Yeah. So it's a lot of work. So it actually takes quite a few people to run that every day. So this is the staff that were all involved once we're fully set up and we're fully going in terms of collecting the eggs. We got 2 boat crews. Each boat's got 3 people in it. We've got the ferry boat that's running fish, and then we've got all the people that are in the trailer on shore running fish as well. Plus, this photo doesn't have we were running last year 2 volunteers a day as well, helping shores to help with running fish as well. So typically, yeah, we can get done, we start at about 8 o'clock, 8:30. Our boat crews are usually done early, 1 o'clock, 2 o'clock. Depending on how backlogged the fish are, then we jump in and we'll start stirring eggs. Get everything quicker. We can get them all fertilized and start to harden. Quicker they can get to Cold Lake. Those guys don't have to work as late into the night as well. So in terms of the stocking, so once they start to hatch out at Cold Lake, generally that's the latter parts of May. They'll start calling us and say, okay, the fry are ready to go. And then we lay out our logistics in terms of lot numbers and total numbers, and then which water bodies. We'll stock generally the southern reservoirs over kind of a 3 to 6 day window, allowing travel to go back and forth. So they'll show up with their truck and a trailer with a large tank, and this tank can hold anywhere, depending on the stocking numbers, for that given day, 1 million, 2 million, sometimes 3 million fry will be in this tank. They basically just use aquarium nets that you can buy at the store to scoop up the fry. They're measuring them out in a volumetric cylinder, so that's basically they can calculate how many fry based on the milliliters. This probably has about 30,000 fry in it. They are tiny. So they're just literally lay across your thumbnail, 2 black eyes and transparent body. So yeah, en route, they're obviously it's an aerated tank. They're checking it every hour on route. They'll stir them up a little bit. Sometimes they can start concentrated. As they start to concentrate, they can start smothering themselves, and actually we can get some loss. In the past, we'll load out kind of 30 to 50,000 into those blue coolers. Walk them out onto the boats and then go to various locations. And then basically we're just dumping the fry to allow them to disperse in areas that typically would be utilized for spawning in that particular water body. So
Are you cautious for redneck grebes and boons and stuff?
not so much with this size of fish. It's actually we avoid areas where there'd be high densities of minnow species, because the minnows like spot-tail shiners. Yeah, this is the smorgasbord for them, right? Yeah. So yeah, we wouldn't go into like a back bay and stock and dump these out. We'd be simply just feeding the forage fish until these get big enough they can escape that. So yeah, this is just a quick summary of what we've been stocking here in the south region. So these are all kind of PP1, PP2 water bodies. Various years, alphabetically. I think we've got 2, 4, 14, 16, 18, 21 ish water bodies that we've stocked since 21 to 2024. Some years, some water bodies have been stocked all 4 years. Some have just been stocked once or twice, or sometimes 3 times. And then here's our total stocking numbers. So so far, yeah, Sylvan Lake, all 4 years, we've stocked just over almost 5.2 million into Sylvan Lake.
Those numbers must be estimates, right? They can't be exact.
They're estimates, yes, because they're measuring based on a volume, right?
Right.
So they're not individually counting every single eyelash that's in there, right? Yeah. So, yeah, your eyes would go cross-eyed, yeah. So
Plus they swim.
So yeah, this past year, we actually only stocked six locations. So we did 40-mile reservoir, the 40-mile Rowo pond. Was the first time we were able to stock. We put 90,000 fry into there. I don't have the numbers of how many fingerlings they actually got out, but there was a decent number. I just can't remember off the top of my head. Their success was a lot better success than they had back in the 80s and 90s. They attempted it 3 or 4 times, and the first couple of years they got 0 return. They had to adjust, and again, the conditions on some of those years weren't favorable. Let's see here. Yeah. This past summer was the highest year. We stocked out just over 9.3 million. So I think, yeah, last spring, I think it was 12 million we collected at St. I think this coming year, we're aiming for about 17,000 or 17 million eggs, so I think 12 million was our target last year. So
And it's all done at Cold Lake. They're all,
the hatchery is all at Cold.
all,
So all those other spawn camps, their eggs get shipped there as well, and they're all separated and kept in separate banks, so they don't mix up. And then they're maintained daily, 24 hours a day. They're going through making sure that those flows are good, and then if there's any eggs that are dying, they're picking out those dead eggs as well. Because if you start getting a high number of dead eggs, it can start forming fungus and kill your whole lots, right? So yeah, I could be here for another hour just talking about the Cold Lake aspects of what occurs in the fish culture.
so how long do they stay in the fish?
How long they stay in Cold Lake?
Yeah.
Yeah, so we ship them that first week of May. By the end of the month, they're shipping them out to us. Yeah, so about 3 weeks.
Stable.
Yeah, that 18 to 20, low 20 days they're hatched out. So yeah, they can control the temperatures and stuff, and basically, yeah, we try to avoid stocking over on a weekend because the lakes are busy. It's just after May long weekend, so we don't want to crowd up a boat launch and tie everything up, so we try to prefer to stock during the weekday when it's less busy. So they try to control the temperatures the best they can in order to hatch out those lots. But again, sometimes it's, they can do it. Sometimes, it just happens out, This past year, we were out on Silver on Saturday. Pull up and try to get in and out as quick as we can, not to tie up the boat launch, so. This is the water bodies up north, so yeah, they first start stocking in 2023, and then last year in 2024, their numbers are a little bit lower. But that was just the first couple of years of their 2 camps, so they will be ramping up this year as well. So yeah, there's, in terms of the communications, so yeah, we got lots of social media, My Wild Alberta posts that go out once we start the spawn camps. We share that information just to allow folks to know what's going on. We update our website. There's more information on our website about the walleye stocking program and other resources. And then eventually all the stocking information gets posted in those fish stocking reports. It's like with all the trout in terms of water bodies, the numbers, the dates of when they were stocked as well. So that's all available. And then again, to wrap things up a little bit in terms of the goal is, creating those angling and harvest opportunities kind of for the 4 to 5 years of time. So it does take a little bit for those small fry to grow up into a fish that anglers can catch. Certainly want to improve and have healthy walleye populations, ultimately happy anglers. And certainly this is just the website to find out more information on the walleye stocking programs. And then, just to end things up here. So certainly, anyone's actually interested in coming out and lending a hand at St. Anne, certainly we are more than welcome to have volunteers come out and help us out. Can't tell you the exact dates. It's going to be sometime late April, early May. If I could predict the ice out, I should be buying lottery tickets, but I unfortunately can't predict it. So the last 4 years, it's kind of been around April 26th, April 29th when we start mobilizing once we get all set up. We typically run the first day with no volunteers just because we want to work our kinks out and we don't know exactly what we're going to catch that first day. But once we have that sorted out and we know what type, what we're catching, if the fish are there in high abundance, or if it's going to slowly ramp up. then we can accommodate and adjust based on that as well. And plus the weather. The weather really plays a factor. If we get clear sunny skies, puts the fish in the mood. If it turns cold, cloudy, puts the fish off the mood. So yeah, it's really a little bit variable. And again, yeah, our volunteers, yeah, we don't put them out in the boats and expose them to any of that. It's just literally on shore here helping and assisting running the fish back and forth. So lots of steps, yeah. Walking in waders, yeah, pretty flat section here. We've got, all the tripping hazards sorted out in terms of making a nice walkway in terms of the ramp right up to the trailer and such. So yeah, if there's any interest, certainly let me know. I think last year we tried to organize maybe some of your members coming out, but I don't think, yeah, it just went so quickly last year, it just didn't work out. So, but we did have another group that had some folks come out for at least 2 of the days. So
We've sent out information in our newsletter about, the process, what happens, and requests for volunteers, and that goes out to about 500 people.
mhm.
So hopefully we'll get some response.
Yeah. And again, yeah, depending on the timing, certainly people aren't available sometimes during the week. But again, we can't predict if we're running through a weekend or which weekend, so. But usually, yeah, we'll provide updates as to, once we know we're mobilizing, then we can start coordinating the volunteers and, yeah. Happy to have folks come out. Yeah, we get lots of locals that'll just stop in and see how things are going, and yeah, kids come in with the families and ask a lot of questions, and yeah, we can walk them around and explain things and show them all the eggs if they're still there, waiting to be hardened up. And then sometimes we might have some fish still hanging around that we can show them as well. So
Excellent.
it's one of our most accessible, projects that we can have public show up, given the location, versus, some remote lake that, we fly everything in, or, it's. Because those camps that historically operated Fiskdew and Primrose, everything's flowing in a helicopter. All those eggs get flown out daily on a helicopter as well. Like the costs start to skyrocket, right? So hence why, if we have locations like this and, healthy walleye fisheries that we can take from. And again, that's a question as well. How many eggs are you taking from this lake, and is it impacting this lake? And based on St. Anne, it's actually less than 1% of the annual production of eggs that we're taking. Because we're simply just handling, a few hundred females, but there's literally thousands that are in the lake. So yeah.
Excellent.
Jason, can I ask a question, please?
Certainly can.
Yeah, no, thank you very much. I enjoyed that. I was going to ask you about the impact on Lac Ste. Anne, but you just answered that. The second question I had,
I'll expand a little bit on that. So actually the index netting that we've done there, we've done it every 2-year rotation, and actually the population, I believe, has increasing, and then actually the recruitment has been showing, like, we've got lots of younger year classes coming up as well. So not just that, we're taking a small percentage of the eggs, but the actual fishery in terms of the numbers and what people are still catching and what we're still able to allocate in terms of tags isn't declining as well. So that's obviously typically a concern with, when we're taking, and people see we take 12 million eggs. Well, that means there's, to most people, it's like, that's going to be 12 million less walleye for their lake, right? But that's not in fact the case, right? So,
yeah, my second question was, and I'm sorry if I missed it. I think I might have missed something. have you got any assessment, or how are you assessing the success to date in the stocking program?
Yeah, it's a great question. So, we were investigating the use of it's called, it's oxytetracycline. It's basically just a chemical that we can treat the fry with, and basically marks their bone structure. So the little tiny ear bone, the otolith, that if we catch that fish, we could take that otolith, again, lethal sampling from our index netting. We can sand that down, and then we could actually detect whether or not it was a stocked fish or not a stocked fish. We were investigating that. It's pretty labor intensive and would require us to, collect a lot of samples. We're looking. We just trialed on Sylvan Lake, and we just had the results back from our lab, and looking at whether or not we could use genetics. So we detect a difference between a stocked walleye versus a walleye that would be naturally within that water body. So Sylvan, we tested it. There we knew the history of the walleye stocking. So the most recent stockings were walleye from, I believe it was Primrose Lake, in 06, 07, and 08, and then previous to that as well. And they were able to successfully determine, based on the samples that we provided them, and tell us that's a Lac Ste walleye that we've stocked versus the Sylvan Lake walleye. So we're investigating, and hopefully we can utilize that going forward, that we could look at stocking success and monitor success over time. But that's a narrow window, because once we get an F1, F2 generation, so once those Lac Ste fish start maturing and spawning, they potentially could spawn with one another and create more Lac Ste genetic fish, or a mixture of Sylvan. So again, it's a narrow window to use genetics for that type of monitoring, but at least initially, it certainly will help us evaluate.
So just to follow up on that, if you were to do that in Sylvan Lake, for example, what proportion would you expect to be, or would you hope would be, stocked fish versus fish native to that lake?
Yeah, that's a great question, right? Again, there's so many other variables that come into play in terms of the success, right? So whether or not, there's ample food for those fry to feed on when we first stock them, and then, predation on those fry, not just initially, but then over time as well. So yeah, again, it's an unknown, but hopefully, like in the past, Sylvan Lake has been successful with the walleye stocking that has occurred there in the past, and we're optimistic that the stockings will be successful going forward. But it's also a lake where has been naturally limited in terms of the natural recruitment that's occurred. So I've been monitoring that lake for the last number of years, where looking at the age classes, and predominantly has been always just the stocked year classes that have been the strongest year classes. We get really weak recruitment occurring in that particular water body. So, but the stockings have been successful. So that's essentially, we're optimistic that those stocked fish will probably be the majority of what will persist. And the objective there is a put and take walleye fishery, given the regulation. It is a one size limit, and we are, looking to do an annual stocking there in order to support that opportunity. So,
Thank you. That was very clear.
What does recruitment mean?
Basically, it's spawning and getting subsequent year classes, right? So they spawn, and hopefully we get lots of recruitment, which is just lots of babies. Yeah. And then various years you can get, lots to none, right? And again, lots of those environmental variables play a factor in terms of spawning success. So not every year you're going to get maximum. spawning success, right? So which essentially is your recruitment numbers in terms of lots of baby fish. So. Yes,
How many weeks did you actually, are they, do you get, tell them a few weeks or,
the,
or you take them back to Cold Lake? How long do you?
yeah, it's about 3 weeks of time from that egg to eyed egg to once they start hatching out. As soon as they start hatching out, that yolk sac that they have probably lasts anywhere from 5 to 7 days. And basically they got to get somewhere so they can start feeding. So typically, yeah, they'll start shipping those out to us 5 days after hatching, you know, plus or minus a day or two.
Do you feed them at all up there?
Nope. Nope. Nope, there's no feed that, they're just feeding on small. Right, so, yeah. So yeah, we're getting them out as they're utilizing their natural egg yolks, yeah, and then getting into those water bodies. And again, that timing is strictly dependent on the conditions of that particular year. So, yeah, naturally, walleye in a lake, they spawn over a course of weeks, or you know, we're taking all that and into 1 day, right? So, you know, naturally, you know, fish spawn over a week or two in a lake, there's going to be hatching over that week or two, and success rates might be better when conditions are more ideal throughout that entire time, or maybe it's just an arrow living time, right? So our stocking really depends on the conditions when we stock out, and we don't control that in a lake situation, right? So again, all our eggs are in one basket. We're hoping things, all the stars align, versus, you know, taking those batches and stocking them out over a more naturalized period of time of what would mimic hatching in a lake, right? It just isn't feasible or logistically possible to do, right? So
Is thermal shock an issue when you're stocking?
certainly is, yep, yep. So when we arrive on site, yeah, we're doing lake water temperatures and the temperature of that holding tank. And they got to be within about 1 to 2 degrees. If they're not, we can take some lake water and mix it with the tank water. Yeah, yeah. And we can acclimatize them, yeah, on site. Yeah. But generally, they're showing up and they're already warming that water slowly at Cold Lake, and it's about 10 degrees roughly, and the lake usually is within a degree or two at that time too. So, but certainly, yeah, it's important. And then again, the reason we don't go into really close to a warm day, because it might be 14 or 15 degrees water temperature, then for a 10, that could be enough to the thermal shock those fish.
So you go searching for water then?
Yeah, yeah, all our boats have sonars and temperatures, and yeah, we're cognizant of those conditions. So.
Okay. Any more questions? Excellent.